It is a huge honor for me to have you here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Can you start off, I guess, with giving just a little bit of your background, where you're from, where you grew up, and as much of your childhood?
Okay, I grew up in Williamsburg, went to Yeshiva Tarvadas all the way through. I also went to Brooklyn and City College, where I got some degrees in mechanical engineering. While I was still in Yeshiva, I drifted into music. I'll get to that, the story of how I got into the music, because it is a story. I was doing music and engineering at the same time. In other words, I was going to class one night and I would play a wedding another night. And eventually I had to make a decision, which I did. Obviously, I decided to become a musician. The story of how I got into music, it was Basher. Definitely we can see the Yad Hashem. And as I look back at it, I don't say that one should say, well, I'm seeing the Yad Hashem and this is how I have to go. I don't think any of us are capable of doing yet, but looking back at it, definitely I was guided. It really all started when I was 14 years old, and I was finished being a camper, and I had to start becoming a staff member, and I wanted to go to Camp Aguda to become, some sort of staff member. At that time, I was into drawing. Music was not part of my life then. And I wanted to go to camp. Now in camp, talent is currency. You know, if you have a talent,
you're in.
You can do something there. And I applied to Camp Aguda and I was rejected because there were like 1,000 applications. Wow. But I knew Mike Tress. I davened in the Aguda in Williamsburg, and Mike Tress was a good friend of my parents. Mike Tress was the president of Aguda at the time. And he heard that I was rejected. I remember he called me up, he put his arms around me and he said, I heard you were rejected, we're going to correct that. And a week later I got an acceptance letter and I went to Camp Aguda and I was there for 2 years. The second year I met Yisroel Teitelbaum, that's Eli Teitelbaum's younger brother. He was in camp and he was playing trumpet, sort of. And he was finished. Basically he was finished. He would let the trumpet lie around. And people would pick up and blow it, and then I picked up and blew it, and I got some notes out of it. And actually, by the time the summer was over, I was able to play a few songs.
You just taught yourself completely.
Yeah, and it sounded pretty awful, but I was able to do it. And he said to me, Yisroel, you got to get a trumpet, you're a natural. That was the last thing on my mind. And anyway, when camp was over, and at that time, my grandfather had a farm in New Haven. So camp was over, and we went to my grandfather's farm. And one day I opened up the towel closet, and you'll never guess what was there.
Trumpet.
A trumpet. Again, the Yad Hashem. What's this, Heidi? What's this? He says when he was in the army, he used to play trumpet.
Wow. And you never knew that up until you
I never knew that at all. Wow. And it was really in rusty shape, but I got it into shape, and I played a little bit, and I got interested in it. By the time we got back to the city, I went and rented a trumpet. And about a year later, I was starting to play at a fair, bar mitzvahs, and I got to know Eli Teitelbaum.
Did you teach yourself to read notes, or you were playing by ear? How?
Yeah, I taught myself. Eventually, I did take a few lessons on trumpet. And just from there, I drifted into arranging and playing at weddings. And at one point, yes, I did make my decision that engineering wasn't in my heart. It wasn't in my soul. Music was in my heart and in my soul. And I became a musician.
As a child, do you have any earliest musical memories? What kind of music did you grow up listening to? Okay,
I clearly remember growing up listening to Benzion Schenker's records. I liked his records because the music was of the highest caliber. There were some others, but I think Benzion's he had Hanan Wintonitz, I think, was his arranger, and I really enjoyed it. And I remember as a teenager, I saved up enough money and I bought a stereo set.
Wow.
I remember, I did listen to radio music. I liked Paul Moriat. I was always interested in orchestra music. And I just remember thinking, seriously, Jewish music needs this. It needs this kind of quality.
How old were you when that happened?
I would say 15, 16. But there was nothing I could do about it at that point.
Because you knew you liked it, but you didn't necessarily know how to do it yet.
I wasn't in the music world.
Right.
first of all, I was doing drawing. That was my talent. And when I expressed a desire to get involved in music, like, oh, you're an artist, what are you going to do to get involved in music? So I need David to direct me to be able to get into the musical world.
For maybe not people who aren't in the music industry, can you break down exactly what it is that you do? I know there's a couple of, you obviously play trumpet, but you're also an arranger and a conductor. So can you explain what those are and what you do?
Okay, so an arranger, you're right, a lot of people don't know what an arranger does.
And then they don't give enough credit for any of it. So that's my hot take.
People will say something like, I don't know, what do they need you for? Just give them the music and let them play, But I say, where does the music comes from? A song is just a melody. Mm-hmm. And the way I like to explain it thematically is a song needs a universe to live in. It needs a place to exist. Otherwise, it's just a plain da-da-da-da. But to bring it to life, it needs a place to exist. And that's what the arranger does. He decides, or he'll work with the producer and the singer, of course, but he'll decide and try to work out what the song is going to sound like, what universe it lives in. Is it a pop song? Is it a rock song? Is it what kind of instrument? What is it going to sound like? Right. And that's what the arranger does. He'll make the introduction, the interludes in between, and eventually it's got to go to musicians to play, and they need parts. It's harmony. A melody has just one line, right? But an arrangement has many things going on at the same time. Sure. And that's really what the arranger and the orchestrator does. He divides the parts among the musicians so it sounds like an arrangement.
And does that, I guess, there's some sort of process that happens in your head first and foremost, where you hear or imagine this happening, and then you have to get that out of your head onto paper or I guess a computer. What's that process? How does that work?
Yeah, you need to hear it first.
Right.
And people often ask me, well, how do you hear it? And it's no big deal. If you're going to speak, if you're going to say something, you're going to hear that sentence in your head first.
Before you say it, right?
Or you should at least. You should think about what you're saying before you say it. You hear the arrangement, and then you take what you hear and you put it down on paper or to the computer.
Right.
And the advantage of the computer is the days when we put it on paper, we really didn't hear it till we went to the studio or till the concert or rehearsal. And I guess some people are better than others imagining, what they hear. Sure. But as often as not, what you thought you heard isn't really what happens.
Sure.
But with the computer, you're hearing it. You're hearing it as you're doing it.
Being that I, grew up, or I guess in my teen years, I already had a computer. I was able to pick a string sound, as realistic or not realistic as it was, and say, okay, let me record that and show it to someone or send them, MIDI files. And then, so it was a lot easier, even though it wasn't like hearing it in the room. I was able to get some idea of like, I think this will work, or I think it won't work.
Yeah, well, sometimes if you're not doing it all the time, this is experience.
Sure.
If you're not doing it all the time, you're just putting things down and you're saying, let's hear how it's going to sound. But the real way to do it is to really hear it in your head and then put down what you're hearing. Just like a painter might go, I see that and I put it onto canvas. Right. Or I imagine something in my head and I put it there. That's really all you're doing. It's not magic.
I found some of my father's, original manuscripts from like when he was, 20 years old. Mm-hmm. It's really crazy to just see like someone actually taking a pen and writing it down. And there's almost like an added value to something where it's like a physical thing as opposed to, okay, I made a file, don't like it, delete it, it disappeared into thin air. It's very cool to find.
For a long time I resisted it.
What, the computer?
The computer. What I used to do was, in the olden days, before the computer started, I used to write it onto a score and send it to a copyist to have the parts extracted for each individual musician. And it would often come back, there were a lot of mistakes, and you couldn't correct the mistakes till you heard it in the studio or at the rehearsal. When computers started becoming, I would say, even popular, I said, you know, there's something about that computer, it's cold. You really need to do it the old-fashioned way. And that was such a mistake, because eventually I met somebody, and he said to me, you know, a musician from Eretz Yisrael, and he said to me, you know, you should go to Finale, to computer. That was a program at the time. And I gave him my whole story. And he said, you know, you'd be able to do a lot more if you went to computer. And the way he said it, it made an impression on me. And I went to computer.
And when things were on paper, let's say if, I don't know, the day before a performance, someone wanted to change key, you would have to write
you were stuck.
You're really stuck.
Right. And if you wanted to transpose something or make corrections, you were stuck.
That's a crazy thought. It's like a whole other reality.
Yeah, that's. I would say I would divide the advantages of a computer into two sections. That you just said, that it's just such an easy tool, makes life easier.
Sure.
And the other one is that you could hear what you're doing. You're living it while you're creating it.
Right.
But don't forget that the technology, it's digital technology. Computers, all digital. That technology that made all of this possible also had a pretty detrimental effect on the whole CD business.
For sure.
So it's a double-edged sword.
I think also in general, when you look at like technology as a whole, the idea of streaming music, it's very hard to argue with the fact that music has almost lost a sense of value. If I can, in 1 second, skip through millions of songs, then this record that someone spent 12 months on making, used to go and buy it and learn every single song and read the notes on the back. And now it's like, oh, I don't like that song. Let me check out 17 other artists in a second. I guess like anything, there's...
Well, if I can get political for a minute.
Please.
I remember reading in one of the computer magazines, I forgot the fellow's name. He wrote a column in the back of PC Magazine, and he said, it's coming, the digital age is coming, and it's going to change the whole music business. And I think the way it changed it for us is that there are a lot of composers out there who aren't performers. And the only reason they made albums was to make money. And they're not making money anymore, so they're not doing it. So we're losing their work. The ones that are making albums these days are performers, and they're basically doing it to advertise themselves.
Card.
It's a glorified business card.
Very expensive business card.
Right. So, and even so, they're making less albums.
Right.
But nevertheless, the music industry is thriving. There's so much music being made.
Well, I think what's interesting is that regardless of what happens with technology or recording, you can see that, I guess, people's desire and need for music, in a live setting and a coming together and seeing a show or a kumsitz or in shul has always been there and will always be there. There's something very powerful about that. The way in which we record it might change, but in terms of what it is, it's still there.
Well, it's so easy to make an album. In those days, it was really very hard. You had to go to a studio, pay exorbitant rates per hour per studio. Right. Now you just in somebody's basement. So there's a lot of music being made. So that's the good thing about it.
It's crazy. Actually, on this iPad, they've now put the Logic Pro, the recording software. This is now powerful enough to have the entire thing on there. I can take this with me. It has a built-in microphone. I could technically record a whole album on this. Do you remember the first time you conducted a symphony orchestra?
Oh, I sure do.
How did it feel? Tell me about that.
Okay, the first time I conducted a symphony orchestra was in Eretz Yisrael. I was in Camp Stay Chemed, and Eli Teitelbaum started the Camp Stay Chemed concerts.
Okay.
The first year, it was a big success. Eretz Yisrael had never seen anything like it. There were concerts for ordinary people, but for the Dati people, for the Haredim, there was no concert. And Eli made 4 concerts, 2 in Heichal Tarbut in Tel Aviv, and 2 in Binyan Oman, Yerushalayim. And it was jammed. There were more people outside waiting for tickets than were able to get in.
How old were you at this time?
My early 20s.
Wow.
And I remember the first night I conducted, the first concert, it was a smaller band, I conducted without a jacket. Just the shirt, everybody has the shoulders, right? And people started saying, no, so the second night I wore a jacket. At the second year, Eli decided to upgrade it, and he hired a symphony orchestra.
Wow.
And I had to arrange for symphony orchestra. I had never arranged for symphony orchestra.
How did you know what to do?
Well, I hit the books. Well, I always listened. I always listened to classical music ever since I was a teenager. My real love is classical music. So I had it in my head. I had to get a hold of some books because I didn't have formal training. That's one of my biggest regrets, that I never had formal training for orchestration. But I got some books and stayed up many, many nights and churned out some symphonic arrangements. Pretty crude, but it worked.
Do you not feel that if you had training, your sound that so many of us know and grew up on would have been different?
No, I don't think so.
No?
I think I just would have known more.
No more, okay.
I would have known more, and the things that I struggled to learn on my own or through trial and error.
You could have learned faster,
I would
maybe.
have learned faster.
Right.
I mean, I know many people, many musicians who have all sorts of degrees and all of that, and it doesn't, it's got to come from the soul. You're not going to get the soul in school, but I think both are necessary.
I love that. I'm going to put that on a t-shirt. It's great. It's a great line. I went to, when I was 18, 19, went to a music school in Israel, and I didn't speak Hebrew, so I spent most of the time not understanding what was going on. And I made a bunch of friends, didn't learn much, but it kind of drove home to me that really what I had to offer was here. And yes, there is a place for notation and theory, but first of all, if you don't have that, especially with technology, it doesn't mean that you can't be involved in the music industry. And second of all, even with that, if there isn't soul in it, then you're kind of missing something a little bit, I feel.
There are some people who say that they think if they get training, it's going to detract from what they do. It's almost like the question you just asked me.
Right.
But they thought it would destroy them, ruin them.
Right.
And I think it's a mistake.
Right. I think the only kind of situation where that might be correct is if you look at a lot of kids, or if you ask the average person that you bump into on the street, do you play a musical instrument? Almost 50% of people, I would say, will say, I used to. And then at age 12, it became way too much like an extra thing I had to do homework for with a strict teacher. So I got rid of it. And I always say, well, if a kid shows interest in music and you say, oh, forget the theory for a second, forget all of this. Let's play songs. Let me show you how to, even by ear, just copy me, create a relationship with the instrument. And if by the time you're 14 or 15, you want to do that, great. Bring in the Bach, bring in, and at that point, there's more of a love, a connection. But I don't know. I'm not an expert.
But if you really love it, and we're talking about that small percentage of the population that really loves, I mean, everybody's doing a lot of different things, but what percentage ends up really loving it? No matter what you do.
Right.
Let's say a doctor. There are plenty of doctors out there that are miserable. But there's a small percentage of doctors really love what they do. And when you have that love for that, there's no limit to what you're going to want to learn.
Right.
They say one of the signs of intelligence is that you want to learn more. An intelligent person wants to learn more. Yeah. So, there are no excuses.
Yeah. I feel that way about music production and mixing. Like, it really is. Yeah. I think that's part of the joy of it, is that it never ends. We spoke about arranging for a second, but conducting, I think that's the biggest mystery. What exactly are you doing?
Okay, in simple terms, you're setting the tempo.
Okay.
In shul, the guy sitting over there is at one speed, and this guy saying a kaddish, he's already, you're right. If there was somebody able to signal everybody to stay together, that's really what the conductor does. That's the simplest thing that the conductor does. Especially in a large orchestra, they're far apart from each other. they're not even hearing each other at the same time because sound travels at a finite speed.
Right.
But if there's somebody who's giving the beat, so
You are
everybody
the
can
anchor,
follow.
really.
What?
You're the anchor, really, for like the
Right.
whole...
This is the speed we're going at. We're all doing it together. Then tempos change. It gets faster and slower. Somebody's got to conduct that tempo change. So that's really what you see at a concert. Honestly speaking, there are a lot of conductors who don't know how to conduct. So what do? I'll get back to that in a minute. So if you go to a concert and you watch carefully, you'll see that most of the musicians aren't looking at the conductor.
Right,
they're following the concertmaster. The concertmaster is the first violinist.
First violinist, right.
You'll often see the conductor shake hands with the concertmaster. I do that all the time because they're following him, and he's part of being a concertmaster is he knows how to conduct. He makes with his violin, and everybody follows him. Okay, but really what a conductor does, his job is really at the rehearsal. He's interpreting the music, especially classical music, by 5 different Beethoven symphony numbered 5. And each one will sound drastically different.
Right.
In fact, to the point where you say, this performance I hate and this performance I love. And that's because each conductor has his idea, his interpretation of the piece, and at rehearsals, that's where he really is doing his thing.
Right. So, for example, if it says, play the next 4 bars, I don't know, give me an example of a...
Okay, Beethoven's 5th, ba-ba-ba-bam.
Right.
One guy's you're going to hear ba-ba-ba-bam, and the next guy you're going to hear ba-ba-ba-bam.
Right.
And you could say, well, ba-ba-ba-bam sounds right.
Right.
And I'm going to say, no, it should be ba-ba-ba-bam. And that's what's so much fun about it. But that's really what the conductor
is doing. Every dynamic and expression, all those things are open to interpretation. There's no... Right.
Yeah.
It's funny because I always, you think about classical music and it's like, well, everyone is getting these same notes. So, why would you go and... Like, what difference does it make if he plays it or he plays it? But that's really the answer. Right? There's a lot of interpretation. And how does it feel to be in that situation when there's, 5,000 people behind you?
Yeah, okay, so you asked me how I felt when I conducted the symphony for the first time. Okay, so I'll be honest about it. Just before I went out on stage, I thought to myself, in the back of my mind, I had a dream that one day I'm going to conduct the symphony orchestra. And in a sense, my dream is now coming true.
Right.
But I don't want to go out there because I'm scared out of my pants.
Yeah. Wow.
But he called me out and, they announced my name and I went out and I did it. And it's great. When you stand in front of an orchestra and you give a downbeat and the orchestra responds, it's a good feeling.
Are there any recordings or videos of that?
Stay Chemed, I don't know. I really don't know.
Okay.
But then it really started for me. Then it was put away. It was filed. It was about 20 years later that Shia Mendlowitz had the idea to do a serious symphonic project. And then I really took myself to task and I studied orchestration, classical orchestration seriously. We went to Eretz Yisrael and we recorded the Philharmonic Experience, which till this day is my favorite project.
Wow, I was going to ask you if this is something that stands out.
Right, and we recorded with the Jerusalem Symphony in Crown Auditorium.
I actually performed with them. It was in the Jerusalem Theatre?
In the Jerusalem,
the Crown.
Crown, yeah.
Yeah. In fact, right before I moved to America, a month before, me and my brother performed with them.
With the orchestra?
Yeah, we did The Sound of Silence and a James Taylor. It was a concert for Emunah. And it was, do you know Simon Cohen? He's a chazan, and I don't remember who else was on the thing, but it was an unbelievable experience to actually stand on the stage with all those musicians and
surrounded by this sound.
Yeah.
And so I didn't conduct that.
Okay.
And the reason that I didn't conduct it because I didn't think I was up to it. At that point, I really wasn't. I'm still not a trained conductor, but I felt for this project we should have a trained conductor. And I also thought my tafka would be better if I was listening.
Right.
So I sat in the audience and I listened. But still, that was a dream. It was a dream come true.
Who conducted that?
Mona Rosenblum.
Oh, wow, okay.
He did a good job, I think. We think. And
is that when you met him?
I knew him from before.
Oh, you knew him before.
You know, we want somebody who had experience conducting, but yet understood the music. You know, for the first time, I heard my symphonic arrangements come to life, and it was that certainly was a dream come true.
No.
And then a few months later, she had decided we're gonna do it at the Hask show, and plus some additional arrangements. And he said, and you're conducting.
This was the first Hask show, or
the second Hask show? This was
okay.
Hask. The first Hask show was a toned down orchestra with string synthesizers.
You did that one as well?
Yeah.
Wow.
But that conducting job is easier. You know, you just count off 1, 2, 3, 4,
right.
and the drummer is
and
the
then you
conductor.
follow the drummer.
Right.
Let's talk about Hask in Time for Music. Had there been anything like that before, and how did you get involved? How did it happen?
There hadn't been anything of that size before. There were concerts. Yigal came in quite a few times and did some nice concerts. Sure. But the idea here was to take the music in our music industry to the next level. But it wasn't just we decided to take the music industry to the next level. There was the hard reality that Camp Hask was about to close down.
Oh, wow.
Because they were losing their funding.
So this was a fundraiser.
So, people brainstormed, and I think she and Ding came up with the idea. You know, let's make this really super concert where people are going to come and spend a lot of money on tickets, and they're going to get dressed up in their finest, and we're just going to make a lot of money for Camp Hask. And where are we going to do it? No, not Brooklyn College. We're going to do it in Lincoln Center, which is, you know.
How many people does that hold?
3,300.
Wow.
And there's a cute story for all Chabad Hasidim that when I tell Chabad Hasidim the story, they freak out. The Khans who ran Camp Hask, who ran Hask, they had some connection to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. They weren't Chabad Hasidim, but they would often ask him questions. So when the idea of a concert came up, they wrote a letter to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe answered them, do it, but do it al pi halacha, separate seating. So they started advertising separate seating, and tickets were not moving.
Wow.
Nothing was. This started in, let's say, September. Nothing was selling. And people would say, if I'm going to spend so much money,
I want to sit with my family.
I want to sit with my wife or whatever.
Right.
So, like 3 weeks before the show, they wrote a letter to the Rebbe. There are no tickets selling. What should we do? And the Rebbe answered, I already answered your question. Do it al pi halacha, and you can be matzliach. Wow. Like a week later, there was just a rush on tickets. Wow. And a week before the show, it was completely sold out.
Wow.
So that's...
It's probably the longest running, maybe, I don't know, yeah.
Yeah, who would have guessed that it would run that long? And it went through generations of producers.
Right.
The torch was handed several times to...
I actually made it on stage at a Hask concert for the first time 3 years ago. And I wasn't just storming the stage, I was actually invited to go on. At Thank You Hashem, we did a song with Avram Fried called Mame. This is actually an example of what I was saying before, how I got in my head that when we did this song, I would love to have a symphony orchestra on it. And I obviously don't have the experience, hear a lot of things in my head, and I sat down and I played in all the parts and the strings and the French horns, sent it to someone and said, whatever needs correcting, correct it. I guess today's version of a copyist. Sent it to Prague. We recorded the song, and I was actually listening back over the internet in real time, and it was just the most, it's not the same as being in a room, but it was the most unbelievable thing. And I guess I was incredibly grateful that the technology allowed me to get from there to the computer, to Prague, to back. And then at the Hask concert, I played it with Avram Fried, so it was really a special moment. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about your relationship with Yigal Salik and London School of Jewish Song. My father was a soloist in the choir for many years.
Definitely.
And he, in fact, he sent me a recording of a show in Brooklyn College where Yigal announces that there's a very special guest in the crowd that he wants to come on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mordechai Werdiger. And my father and MBT did a solo together. Mm-hmm. And he always talks about his shows in Brooklyn. So I'm sure there was some kind of crossover in that period. But if you could tell me about your relationship and that time.
Yeah, well, first of all, Yigal became, besides, we did a lot of music, he became one of my best friends. Actually, the first time we met was in Williamsburg. He happened to be visiting Williamsburg. At that point, I think he just put out the Tzitzis album that was famous, and the Baruch Nafshi or whatever. So we were starting to hear about him, and I had just put out the first Neginah album.
Okay.
So I don't remember what he was doing in Williamsburg. I think he was visiting relatives, and we just happened to be in the same shul, and somebody said, that's Yigal Salik. And so I went over to him.
He was like a superstar celebrity, right?
Well, to the extent that there were superstars in those days. He was just starting to become famous, and I had just put out an album. So some people said, maybe you should meet him.
Yeah, okay.
So I went, we said good Shabbos to each other, and that was the end of that. And no, but what we really got to know each other was, I think it was the second year of Stechem. Okay, I'm not sure whether it was the first year or second year. Eli Teitelbaum invited Yigal to come with a bunch of boys to Stechem. And I imagine the intent was to put them on a concert. And that's where I got to know Yigal. We were in camp together. We worked together because we had to put the kids on stage.
Right.
I remember saying, this is it. And I called Isaac Gross, who was that time managing Neginah, and I said, I got something really hot. And I was a shadchan between Isaac and Yigal. When the summer was over, we flew to London. We met, and that's where the first London Neginah album came from.
In London?
We recorded the music in New York.
On each track?
We had 4 tracks.
Wow.
2 tracks for music.
Wow.
And we flew to London with 2 empty tracks. And we went to the studio with the choir. 2 microphones recorded live. And that's where the London Neginah, and that's where our friendship started. And that's where a lot of music, the beginning of a lot of music made together.
Pretty. Wow. And then the shows that they did in New York, you were involved in all of the shows?
I conducted and arranged them.
Wow.
It was pretty rudimentary level at that point, but that's what the music was. Yigal's music was just, it was the soul.
What is it about? There's clearly something different and special about those songs. There's almost like a timeless feel to them. From a musical standpoint, is there something that you can put your finger on about his compositions?
They were great melodies. They sounded Jewish, with a little bit of a European flair. It was also Yigal himself. When he got on stage, he really connected with the crowd, and the way the kids sounded, that British accent. I always think that the accent changes the voice. Like you hear somebody singing with an American accent, singing a pop song, it sounds one way, but send that guy over to France and sing it in French, it's not the same voice, it's a different voice.
Quality, right.
Yeah, and I think that's, everybody was charmed by the way the kids sounded with the British accent, but I think it was more than the British accent. Their voices changed.
Right.
And the kids were good.
Right.
They were adorable. It was just a great show. And there were other choirs forming at the time, but Yigal had them all beat on every level.
See, England's not good for nothing, right?
No, that was great.
The Beatles and London School of Jewish Song.
I was there. I spent quite a bit of time in London with Yigal. Yeah, it was great.
Wow.
Maybe you get into, if I may get into a little,
Please.
Not off topic, but expand on the topic a little bit. Yigal felt very strongly that songs should sound Jewish. Jewish with maybe a more European flavor than we were used to, but he hated the songs that sounded Goyish. Now, there were even Goyish songs that sounded Jewish. You know, we're getting all mixed up. So I think some of the songs that he liked and some of the songs that he performed or he composed were inspired by, you know, European songs and songs that he grew up with. But he always wanted them to sound Jewish. And I think as Yidden, we like Jewish songs. What a Jewish song is, that's a...
Oh, well, that was my next question, and it's the name of the podcast, which is what is Jewish music? If you had to... I guess if you had to answer that, because you said just now, I think you said Jewish songs or it sounds Jewish, but ultimately what is, you know, when we say to kids we want you to listen to Jewish music?
All right, so I'm going to give you an answer. This answer didn't come just now.
Okay.
It's the result of discussing these things over a long period of time. We discuss it among ourselves in the industry.
Sure.
Because to many people in our industry, it's important that it sound Jewish, that it be Jewish. And we know that that Goyish songs have made their way into our lives. And the question is that good or bad? This is what I think. Poetry says what prose can't say, right? Music, somebody said this, I didn't say this, somebody said this, some wise man said this. Music says what poetry can't even say. You can't put what music says into words. You can say, it reminds me of this, or the composer means to depict something like that, but that's really scratching the surface. What music is really saying can't be put into words. And, you know, what Beethoven actually meant when he went ba-ba-ba-bum, you could say, well, fate is knocking on the door, but it pales to what it really says. And I think that Jewish music tells us what it feels to be a Yid. You know, we go to shul, we daven, we shake a little, we do that, but that doesn't really tell us what we feel collectively, what we feel it means to be a Yid. You know, you could say it means there's a warm feeling, there's a Heimish feeling, but that's all, again, it's just scratching the surface.
Right.
And why is the Baal Tshuva movement so successful with music? Because that's the way we can bring Balei Tshuva in. This is what it feels like to be a Yid. So a Jewish song gives you that feeling of what it means to be a Yid, which a Goy song doesn't do. A Goy song gives you a different feeling. Mm-hmm. It might be what it means to be a Frenchman, what it means to be a Russian, or what it means to be a rock star. But it doesn't tell you. So Yigal always had that idea in mind. It's got to feel Jewish. It's got to be able, I've got to get on stage, feel this, and project this to the audience. So that's the best I can do.
No, I like that. I like that answer. What are you currently working on?
What am I currently?
Yeah, like music-wise.
Okay, so I do arrangements for chuppahs. I work basically for the Aaron Teitelbaum Orchestra. But,
okay.
And when there's a large chuppah, you know, it needs arrangements. You can't just throw a bunch of musicians and have them play the same thing. So I do quite a bit of that. And albums, there's still albums being recorded.
Right.
And still some studio work going on. Where that changed is that where I used to spend half of my life in the studio, now I just send the parts to musicians who are recording in their basements, which you know about that well.
Yep. Do you still get a kick out of it? Does it still excite you?
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah?
Yes.
Wow. I don't think there are many things like that. You started this when you were 20, you said? So I'm not going to ask you exactly how many years you've been doing it for, but I don't know many other industries. I don't think there are a lot of accountants that can say, hey, I'm still excited by this, or I'm still, I'm going to, if you're writing a chuppah for something next week and it still gives you this feeling of this emotional, warm feeling, kind of, almost a little taste of standing in front of a symphony orchestra, that most other jobs, I imagine, it just goes after a while, which is pretty.
Well, I think
amazing thing.
That's where people who work in the arts are fortunate. It's not just music. It could be painting, could be writing,
right?
Anything creative. You constantly want to grow. You constantly want to do something better.
Sure.
So, and you loved it all the years that you were doing it. You want to keep on doing it.
Right.
They say that, I'm going to retire. I'm going to take up a hobby. But this was always my hobby. Maybe I got paid for it sometimes. But I tell people, let's say if I'm going to work till 7 o'clock. So from 9 to 5 I work, and from 5 to 7 I'm doing my hobby.
Right. Is there any advice that you have for, I don't know, a young person who wants to do either conducting or arranging today? What would you tell them?
Well, obviously, go to school, learn your craft.
Okay.
It'll save you a lot of heartache. Only do it if you love it. And Ayn Rand, the author,
mm-hmm.
So I read everything she wrote. The Fountainhead, I thought especially speaks to us, speaks to artists. And she said, don't do something for a living that you love, because they're going to take advantage of you. And they do. They try to. As long as you're aware of that,
right?
Either, stick to your guns or hire a good manager.
Right. Right.
But otherwise, make sure that you really love it, because other than, they may try to take advantage of you, it's not always going to go good. When you brought up the example of an accountant, so I'll use that.
Sorry to all the accountants. I
have a brother who's an accountant. He loves it.
Okay, there you go. So maybe I'm wrong.
He's still doing it. He loves it.
Okay.
We put our souls into what we do. We take ourselves very seriously. So when an accountant does a return and it's not that great, so, right, that's what I think. So the client pays a little bit more than he should have paid. But when we work hard on a project and it doesn't work out, or like you do an arrangement and you get up in front of the orchestra, start playing it, and you say to yourself, this really doesn't sound that good. It's tough.
Right.
I remember one Hask show that, I thought this was cute. We would do a Hask show, and then I'd go to the parking lot to pick up my car. And everybody would stop by, hey, Yisroel, it was great. It was a great show. Good job, shkayach, whatever, whether they meant it or not, it was nice. It was one year that I went to the parking lot, and my wife said to me, nobody's coming over. The show basically bombed.
Wow.
It was Hask 7, and we tried to do a play. And there were two things wrong with it. One is that it was just so much work that we never really finished. Okay. We never were able to finish it. And so we learned a lesson that putting on a Broadway-style show is really something.
It's a big deal.
You can't take that lightly. And the other thing was people didn't get the perception that there was enough music. They thought there was too much talking and acting. And that's really not true. I can testify that there was probably more music prepared for that show than any other Hask show. But people didn't get that perception. So that show basically bombed. And that's tough when you when you work for so long and you put your heart and soul into it. So I would tell young people, you really got to love it, because they're going to be bumps in the road.
Sure. Is there a part of you that ever feels almost like, I don't know, that most of what you do is behind the scenes, and there's almost a lack of recognition, not from a place of ego, but these albums come out and people go over to the singer and they're like, that was an unbelievable album. Meanwhile, someone like you has probably spent, I don't know how many hundreds of hours working on it. Does that ever bother you, that dynamic?
No.
Has it ever bothered you?
No.
Okay.
And some people say that it should. And I'm not praving a nevis or anything like that. But the way I always looked at it, was the biggest joy is in doing it, in creating it. The biggest covet that you can give me is hiring me to do a concert or an album. You know, what comes after that comes. But that's where my joy is. My joy is sitting in that office across the street and doing the arrangement. First of all, when I finish an arrangement and I hear it back on the computer, or in the olden days when I heard it back in my head, it was perfect. Every note was played correctly.
Right.
When you give it to real people to play, that's when it's downhill. So that's really where the joy and the fun is in the creative process. So what happens after that? You know, when I did my first album, it was horrible. It was terrible. I was so embarrassed about it. But it was good enough that they wanted me to do another one.
Right.
And that's all I needed. And there's a curse that we have. I've spoken to other people in similar situations. We have a curse. The curse is that it never comes out the way we expected it or we hoped that it was going to be. And some people handle that by just doing it over and over again. But, you know, it's like getting on the treadmill.
Right.
You know, some people I work with are like that. And I tell them, I said, leave that for the next album.
Right.
Let's get this album out. But I think almost by definition, we're cursed in that sense, is because every time you do a job, every time you do something, you've learned something.
Sure.
And you started here, and when the project is finished, you know so much more.
Right.
But yet the project is based on what you knew then.
Right.
So you want to do more, you want to do better. So even when you finish a project, it's satisfaction. A lot of the satisfaction is missing. I always say, I don't want to hear it for 6 months because
I know that feeling.
You heal.
Right.
You know.
I think it's also like it's almost like a record or a stamp of this is who I was and what I did at that point. And you know, I know a lot of artists who will work on an album for 10 years because during those 10 years they're trying to perfect it, but I can guarantee that 5 or 10 years after that they're not going to necessarily like that anyway. So I think that there has to be an element of letting go at a certain point and saying this is it, this is what I'm able to make right now, this is the best that I have. And then not overthinking it sometimes, you know, saying this is my offering.
Yeah, again, leave that what you learned for the next album.
Yeah.
But you're gonna go through the same thing again on the next album. But still, enjoy it while you're doing it.
Yeah. Well, I want to say thank you again for taking this long journey across the street.
Thanks for having me.
And it really is I've had this on my list for a while to meet you and get to talk to you. So thank you.
Yeah, nice. Certainly nice meeting you too.
You too.